I started thinking about the fact that so often in my life and probably in yours, we feel inadequate. Have you ever felt inadequate? And what I mean is like whatever is in front of you at the moment is just too big. And let's call it a task. Maybe there's a task that's been put in front of you. Maybe you could call it an assignment. Maybe an assignment has been put in front of you. And maybe you feel like you asked for the task, you asked for the assignment, you asked for this gig, you started a new business, or you got married, or right? Or you had a kid, or whatever. And all of a sudden, there's this task, there's this thing in front of you, and it just is like huge. And it makes you shrink back and feel too small and inadequate. Sometimes we don't ask for it. Sometimes something gets put in front of us, a health issue or some other kind of issue, or something happens with one of our kids, or something happens in our life, and it's not anything we asked for, but it's boom, put in front of us, and we're like, man, this task is too much. This assignment is too much, and you just feel inadequate. I want to share with you a couple examples from my own life about what this looks like. As I was thinking back on times in my life that I felt totally inadequate, one of the first places I went was when we were, Sean and I, walking out of the hospital about 19 years ago, almost 20 now, and I had my kid, you can ask Shauna, my firstborn, in a car seat, and the nurse said, "You can't leave like that." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "The arms and legs have to be like strapped in. You just got her like a football stuck in there." And I'm like, "Y'all didn't give me an instruction book," is what I'm thinking. I'm like, "Can you not see that we're going to have problems here?" Isn't it crazy that they don't give you an instruction book for kids when you're leaving the hospital? I felt really inadequate at that moment because we're leaving, and I'm like, "Shauna, they're kicking us out of the hospital, and we've got to go raise a kid." I felt so inadequate when I became a father. It was just like, whoa, and boom, here it is. I thought I would be ready, but I just wasn't ready. Another time I think about feeling like the task or assignment was too big was actually a couple years after I started this church. I'll tell you, I went into this church kind of arrogantly. I was like, "Oh, we're going to save the world. We're going to do so much. It's going to be great," blah, blah. You know how people can be sometimes. And I kind of went in with that attitude, and I thought, man, this is going to be the best thing ever. We're going to have the best church ever. And a couple years into it, it really hit me like this is a huge task. There were only a few people. We had no facilities. We were trying to find places to meet. Money was tight. I mean, it was just tough. And I came to the place, I'll tell you, where I was like, I don't think I can do this. I was looking for any way to get out that I could without disappointing the, 37 people that were there at the time. It was more than that. It was like 42, something like that. No. I mean, I really, listen, if you were there at the beginning, I'm so thankful for you. I'm thankful for you now if you're here now, but listen, man, I don't know if I'd have got through the beginning if it weren't for the people who came alongside and encouraged me and stuff, even when you didn't know I was struggling. You know that whole no church face thing? That's for me. I'm like Mr. Church Face. Like, I just act like everything's okay sometimes when it's really not. So I'm preaching myself. Sometimes we talk about not having church face here at Quest, and I really believe in that, but man, I struggle with it myself. So when I started this church a couple years into it, I was like, this is crazy. And I'll tell you, the biggest fear I had was failing. It's starting something like this, and then for it to fail was just, man, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to go on. I had my whole self and identity and everything tied up in this, in bad ways that I shouldn't have. You ever felt like that? I mean, you have your own story. I don't know. Those are just a couple things from my life, and I have several more, honestly. But, man, if you've ever felt inadequate, like something's in front of you, and it could be what I said, it could be something else. Maybe you're getting ready to retire. I thought of that one, too, just recently between services. I'm like, maybe there's some people getting ready to retire, and they're not sure. I mean, some of you are like, I haven't even started a job. I'm looking for a job. I'll take your job, right? But maybe somebody, some of y'all are, I don't know, what am I going to do when that happens? And that's kind of like this assignment, this task that's in front of you. I don't know. There's just 1,000 things that we face sometimes, and you just feel like small, like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. If you've ever felt like that, you're in good company. I feel that way, but I don't mean you're in good company because I do. Everyone else feels that way. And I don't just mean you're in good company because everybody else feels that way, whether they say it or not. Actually, every single person in the biblical story felt that way. Every one of them. They were all given tasks and assignments by God. And I don't know if you're a Christian or not. I'm glad you're here if you're not. But listen, the people in the Bible were often given tasks and assignments by God, and they always felt inadequate. One of my favorite stories of that, there's many, all of them felt that way. I could tell you a story about all of them, but one of them was Moses. And I've been preaching about him recently for some reason. He just keeps popping up in my own life, so maybe it's something I'm dealing with. But Moses was an Old Testament character, and let me give you a little context and then share just one little snapshot of his life with you where he felt inadequate and what God did about that, and how God pushed forward with Moses, even though he felt inadequate, just like we all do. So Moses was, he came about during the time that the Hebrew nation, Israelites, were enslaved in Egypt. And I don't know if you know that story, but basically the Israelites, before they got the promised land, promised to a guy named Abraham. That's in Genesis 12. You can read about that. God said, I'm going to give you a land, I'm going to multiply you, I'm going to make you famous, but famous for my name, and you're going to be a light to many nations. You're going to bless all the families of the earth, including ours here today. This is what God promised Abraham. Well, that didn't happen for a long time, and during that time, before they got to the promised land, there was a guy named Moses who was born, and he was born into slavery. His people were enslaved in Egypt. And the Pharaoh during the time, which was the king of Egypt, very powerful place, he had enslaved the Israelite people, and he was using them to build his cities and all this kind of stuff. Moses was born into that. The Pharaoh looked around and said, there's a lot of Hebrew children being born. We need to kill all the males, the young males, because we need to wipe out that generation so they don't rise up against us someday. And so he did that. Well, Moses was spared because his mama stuck him in a basket and floated him along the river. And Pharaoh's daughter found him. He kind of came floating in where she and some of her servants were. And she brought this little Hebrew baby to her dad, the Pharaoh, the king, and said, can I keep him? It's just one. And the Pharaoh was like, sure, what harm is that going to do? And so he was raised as an Egyptian prince, basically, even though he's a Hebrew. All right, so one day when he's an adult, you can read about this in Exodus in the beginning, Exodus 1, 2, and 3. One day when he was an adult, Moses sees one of his own people being beaten. Remember, he's an Egyptian prince, but not really, he's Hebrew. He was just spared when he was young. And so he sees one of his own people getting beaten by an Egyptian slave driver, basically, and he kills the guy who's beating the Hebrew. He kills the Egyptian. He buries him in the sand and runs off because he knows he's in trouble. He goes into the wilderness. In the wilderness, he meets a family, and he marries one of the daughters of a man named Jethro, who was the prince of Midian, was who he was. And he's out in the wilderness. And Moses has some kids, and he just lives life in the wilderness, tending sheep and stuff like that. He's run away. And then God shows up and gives him a task, gives him an assignment after all this time. Here's the story. It says, one day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. I mean, this is crazy. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it. So the bush is on fire, but it's not being consumed by the fire. The leaves are still green or whatever. It's crazy, right? It says this, when the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush. Now the bush starts talking. Moses, Moses. Kind of crazy. Here I am, Moses replied. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. Then the Lord told him, I've certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I've heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. I've come to rescue them and give them a new future. And that's the promised land promised to Abraham long, long ago. And then the task is given. Now go, Moses, for I'm sending you to Pharaoh, and you must lead my people, Israel, out of Egypt. So I highlighted that last part because here's this story, and into that story God speaks, and God gives Moses an assignment. He's given this task, and it's a big one, isn't it? Go back and walk into the Pharaoh's court. And by the way, in half a second, he could have your head for that. You have to be summoned to see the king. But no, just go on into Pharaoh's court and tell him to let the people go who are building all his cities for free. How do you think Moses is going to deal with this? And by the way, Moses probably had a price on his head at this point because he had killed an Egyptian. He's wanted. It's interesting how Moses responds. Moses protested to God. That's what I'd have done. And I highlighted this part. Who am I, Moses says, to appear before Pharaoh? And again, who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? Who am I to do these things? I can't do this. It's too big. He felt inadequate. Do you know who you're calling? Don't you know? And Moses says at one point, I stutter. I'm not even a good speaker. I don't even talk well. To which God responds, hello, who made your mouth? All this kind of stuff. And so if you read the next 2 chapters, the rest of chapter 3 and then the next chapter, chapter 4, basically, it's a conversation, I'd call it an argument from Moses' point of view, between him and God, where he constantly tells God, I can't do this. It's too big. I don't think you understand. I'm inadequate. You need to find somebody else. Hello, plan B, God. Plan A is not good. You need a plan B. Trust me on this one, God. The task is too big. The assignment is too great. I can't handle it. Now, the very next verse, Moses is protesting. The very next verse, look at what God says. He says this, God answered, I will be with you, Moses. And then that conversation for a couple chapters ensues, and it's basically back and forth where Moses protests and says, don't you know, or who am I, and all this. And God says, Moses, I'll be with you. I'm behind you. I got your back. All this kind of stuff. And Moses just keeps, you know what? No, I don't think you understand. You need a plan B, all this kind of stuff. Back and forth, back and forth. But the promise of God is that he would be with him. And what God does is he recounts for Moses the things he's already done. He doesn't just ask him to have blind faith. I think sometimes we think that God asks us just to have blind faith. Well, if you look back at what God has done, you will often come to a place of faith because you realize he's been with you the entire time. Has this ever happened to you? And so he has to remind Moses of all the things that he's done. But, I'll tell you, I felt like Moses because I've been at the point in my life, haven't you? Again, sometimes I ask for it, other times I don't, and it just happens, this assignment or task before me, and I'm just like, I can't do this, God. I can't do this. Why would you put me in this place? Why am I here? Why am I standing in this place? Why is the bush talking to me? I should have ran. Why did I go up to the bush and address it? Why? I've been there. You've been there. You are there, maybe, in some kind of way. And God is trying to get your attention through the burning bush, and he's also trying to let you know that he's with you. He's been with you, and he'll be with you. What this story reminds me of is that there's just no plan B with God. Because God does not give up. He does not relent. He continues to tell Moses, this is the plan. This is the plan. This is the plan. Every time Moses says, this is not the plan. We need another plan. I don't know what I just need to put my shoes back on and leave, right? I don't want to be here. I think that Moses had to get to the point that we all need to get to. And that's this, and I'll say it this way, that we understand that the God who stands behind us is bigger than whatever task stands before us. And you need to make that personal and say, me. that the God who stands behind you, because that's what he said to Moses, I'm with you, is bigger than whatever task is in front of you. Whatever is in front of you. And I know we can make this into really big things sometimes. Like, are you talking about, am I called to be a missionary? Are you talking about, you talk about starting a church? No, I'm talking about, it could be that. It could be 1,000 things. It could just be that you need to go love your spouse better. And that's a big task, and you're like, I just don't know if I can do it, and you got to forgive somebody or this or that. There's just so many things that stand in front of us, and it just seems like I don't know if I can trust. I don't know if I can have faith, and we've got to come to the place where we believe and trust and have faith that the God behind us is bigger than the task or the assignment in front of us. I mean, God could have said, fine, plan B, I'll come up with something else. I'll figure out another way. I had a plan B, I didn't think you'd go for it, so I've got something else. And it's not what he does. He could have gone with a plan B and said, I'll find somebody else to do this. Fine, you're not up to the task. But it's not what he does. He reminds Moses that he's with him. So my question for you is this: what's standing before you today? Seriously, think about it. What is in front of you that seems big? What is in front of you that seems insurmountable? What is the assignment? And some of you, maybe it's something new. Maybe it's something that you've been dealing with for years and years and years, and you're like, I can't believe you brought this back up and brought this back into view today. How dare you, preacher? And I would say to you, I think God doesn't have a plan B. And he's just going to keep putting that. Maybe for you it's pride and arrogance. I know for me, the sin of pride and arrogance has been a problem. Maybe it's a certain sin, a certain this, a certain that God wants to finally deal with. And it seems like I just can't do this. It's overwhelming. It's too difficult. It's bigger than me. When that happens, I hope you'll think about Moses. But not only that, can I give you one other person, just real quick, who had to deal with this? Jesus. You're like, whoa, Jesus was God. Yep, yeah, he was. I can't tell you, though, how many times you've been to church here, I go to the Garden of Gethsemane story, where Jesus, the night before his death, the biggest assignment that ever given to anybody in this world, to die for the sins of the world, to die to bring people back to God, to die to show the world that they are loved. Jesus was given that task, that assignment. In the garden, right before that happens, he's praying, and he prays this: God, if there's any other way, if there's a plan B, I'd like to go with that. But not my plan, not my will, God, your will be done. I'll go with plan A. Because I know you're bigger than the cross. I know you're bigger than the grave. So, if you have a task before you, an assignment before you, have faith that the God behind you is bigger than the task in front of you. But don't just have blind faith. Have faith because Moses had faith and he saw what God did, and you can read his story and you can see how God did what he said he would do. Have faith, not just because I say to have faith and have blind faith. Have faith because God was with Jesus. And when he died on a cross and was put in a grave as a dead man, God brought him back to life. Have faith because of that. It's not blind faith. It's real faith. Have faith that God is bigger than whatever is in front of you. I hope that encourages you today, because I just feel like a lot of us have tasks and assignments in front of us and we're struggling. And today I wanted to encourage you. There's no plan B with God. He's going to keep bringing us back to that task, back to that assignment, because he loves us and he believes in us and he'll walk with us and he'll get us through it. We just have to have